The October wind cut through the empty street like a blade wrapped in ice. A 7-year-old girl named Emma wore a torn pink jacket, the hem unraveling, and muddy sneakers that did not match. She screamed. Her small voice cracked against the darkness as a man in a grey coat dragged her by the arm toward a black sedan parked under a streetlight that had stopped working weeks ago. The man's fingers closed around her wrist like a cage. Emma's screams echoed between the buildings. Sofia Sinclair did not think. She moved. She was on the 3rd floor of her apartment building when she heard it, standing in front of her bathroom mirror with a towel wrapped around her wet hair, when the sound climbed through the broken window and pierced something inside her chest. Sofia dropped the towel. She grabbed the grey hoodie draped over her chair, the only warm thing she owned besides the sweater with the hole in the shoulder, and she ran. Down the stairs, 2 at a time, her bare feet slapping against the concrete steps, breath coming in sharp clouds. The October cold hit her like a fist when she burst through the lobby door. The man had Emma halfway to the sedan now. The child twisted, her body small and desperate against his weight. Sofia ran toward them, her feet finding purchase on the broken pavement, and without any thought beyond the animal need to stop this, she grabbed his wrist. His arm was thick muscle and cold cloth. He turned on her with eyes that held nothing human inside them, and he shoved her backward. Hard. Sofia's shoulder collided with the brick wall behind her and fire exploded through the joint. Her vision went white for a moment. Pain was the only clear thing. She stayed against the wall, ribs heaving, and she knew, in the way a small animal knows the approach of a predator, that this man would hurt her if she fought again. So she did not fight. She reached into her pocket instead. Her hand closed around something crumpled. A dollar bill. The last one. She had counted $34 exactly 2 hours ago, sitting on the edge of her bed under a lamp that flickered like a dying heartbeat, arranging the bills in rows by denomination. 1s and 5s and a single $10 bill. $34. That was all that remained between her and absolute emptiness. $34 to last until next Friday when Hale would hand her a check that would bounce, the way it always did, because the hotel manager kept borrowing from the maid payroll and never returned a single cent. But $34 was better than zero. Sofia pressed the bill into Emma's trembling hand. The child's skin was ice. Her fingers closed around the paper with no understanding of what it meant, only that an adult was telling her to do something, so her small body obeyed. Sofia's voice came out like gravel, like something broken. Run. Just run. Don't look back. Emma ran. The man cursed, a sound like something wounded, and he turned to chase her into the darkness between the 2 apartment buildings. His footsteps pounded the pavement, then faded. The sedan sat empty and running, exhaust clouding the air. Sofia slid down the brick wall until she was sitting on the cold concrete. Her shoulder radiated pain in waves. Her breath came in stutters. She wrapped her arms around her knees and she waited there in the October cold, trembling in her thin grey hoodie, watching the empty street as if the man might come back, as if Emma might walk out of the darkness unchanged. The child did not return. Across the street, parked in the shadow of an abandoned storefront, a black SUV with tinted windows sat running. The engine was a quiet rumble, barely perceptible. In the back seat, a man sat with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, watching everything through glass so dark it looked like obsidian. His name was Luca Castellano. He was 42 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the kind of build that came from violence and discipline rather than any gym. His suit was charcoal and hand-tailored in Milan, the fabric soft as water. His white dress shirt was open at the collar, revealing a chest marked by a scar that ran from his collarbone to the 3rd rib, a scar he never explained and his men never asked about. His Lieutenant Sergio sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, eyes fixed on the street ahead. In the passenger seat, Pietro reviewed something on his phone, his jaw tight. Sergio turned slightly. His voice was careful, the voice of a man who had learned long ago to interrupt his boss only when absolutely necessary. Boss. That woman just. Luca raised one hand. A single motion. Sergio's words died instantly. Luca's dark eyes tracked Sofia as she stood up on shaking legs and limped back toward the apartment building. She held her shoulder like it might fall off. She kept her head down. He watched her disappear through the lobby door, the way her body moved small and careful, like someone trying not to take up space in the world. He knew her face. She came to his mansion every Tuesday and Friday. She moved through his corridors like a ghost, black and white uniform, never meeting anyone's eyes, never speaking unless spoken to. She cleaned his study, his bedroom, his kitchen. He had never truly noticed her until this moment. She was furniture. She was background. She was the kind of person the world had decided did not matter. But what she did not know was this: the man who had dragged Emma worked for Douglas Hale. Hale was a creature made of borrowed money and stolen greed, a hotel manager who had been skimming from Luca's poker rooms for 6 months, taking $60,000 in small increments, hoping no one would notice. And they would have noticed. Luca's men noticed everything. But Hale was desperate. His debts had reached a threshold he could not step back from, and he had decided that leverage was his only option. A child was leverage. Emma was Douglas Hale's sister's daughter. The girl had been taken from school pickup 3 days ago. Now she was the collateral against a debt that could never be paid. Sergio waited. He had worked for Luca for 15 years and he had learned that silence was sometimes the only respectful response. But his mind was racing through what he had just witnessed. In 15 years, he had never seen Luca acknowledge the maid. He didn't know her name. Luca did not acknowledge people who fell outside his world. That was not cruelty, it was simply the way power worked. You did not notice the people beneath you. And yet he had watched. He had watched so carefully that Sergio understood something had shifted in the world, some small gravity that pulled Luca's attention toward that woman and held it. Luca's voice came from the back seat, deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Find out who the man was. Find out who he works for. Find out everything about the girl. Yes, boss, Sergio said. Pietro was already typing. The black SUV rolled forward into the October night. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, back to the moment when Sofia Sinclair was alone in her studio apartment, counting the last money she would ever possess. 7 hours earlier, at 4:56 in the afternoon, Sofia stood in front of her bathroom mirror and braided her dark hair into 2 long ropes that hung past her shoulders. She was 29 years old, but her eyes held the weight of someone much older. Dark circles lived beneath them like permanent residents. Her face was pale from double shifts and too little sleep and a diet built from coffee and whatever leftover food she could pull from the hotel's garbage cans before the managers threw it away. She had high cheekbones and a small mouth and dark brown eyes that had once held something like hope, though she barely remembered what that felt like anymore. The apartment was studio-sized, which meant the bedroom and kitchen and living room were all the same space, separated only by what your mind decided to call them. The radiator clanked and hissed. The window overlooked an alley where rats moved through the darkness like small ghosts. The rent was $950 a month. Her take-home pay, when Hale didn't steal from her, was approximately $1,200. The mathematics of survival left no room for unexpected expenses. She finished braiding her hair and twisted the ropes into a bun at the back of her head, the kind of neat, invisible style that the hotel required. She was supposed to be invisible. The guests should not see her. She should move through the corridors like smoke, present but unreal, there to clean but not to be noticed. That was the job description. That was the understanding. Sofia changed into her uniform, the black pants with the permanent stain on the left knee that would not wash out, the white button-up shirt with the embroidered name tag that read Sofia in silver thread. She pulled on her shoes, the black flats that hurt her feet after 8 hours of standing. She gathered her small purse, her phone that was 3 years old and cracked across the screen, her keys on a green plastic ring that had lost its shape from use. And then she sat on her bed and she cried. Not the kind of crying that releases anything. The kind of crying that is purely mechanical, tears moving down her face while her mind stayed distant and empty. She cried because an hour ago, a piece of white paper had been slid under her door. A foreclosure notice. The landlord had decided to sell the building. The notice said she had $125,000 due in 2 weeks or the apartment would be seized. The mathematics of this number were so impossible that her brain could not process it. $125,000. 2 weeks. She made $1,200 a month. That meant she would need to work for 104 years straight without sleeping or eating or dying. That meant the number was not a number anymore. It was a void. It was the end. Sofia wiped her face with her sleeve and stood up. She smoothed her uniform. She tied her shoes. She picked up her purse. She would go to the hotel. She would work the evening shift. She would pretend that her world had not just collapsed. She would do this because doing this was what people did. You worked until you died. You worked until you couldn't. She was halfway to the door when she saw the envelope on her nightstand, the one she had not noticed before. Her name was written on it in careful handwriting. Inside was a birthday card. Happy 29th birthday, Sofia. It was signed by 3 of the housekeeping staff, Maria and Chen and Jessica. The card had a cupcake on the front and inside they had written something about her being a good person and a good coworker. Sofia sat back down on the bed. She held the card. She thought about the fact that she had forgotten her own birthday. She was 29 years old today. She had spent the day in panic about the foreclosure notice and she had forgotten that today was supposed to be the day she celebrated another year of survival. She set the card down gently on her pillow. Then she picked up the $34 from her nightstand, where she had arranged it in the lamplight, and she shoved it into her pocket. She turned off the lamp. The room went very dark. For a moment, she stood in the darkness and she let herself remember what it felt like to believe in a future. Then she opened the door and left. The hotel was 12 blocks away. It was called the Grand Imperial and it had 300 rooms and a casino on the ground floor where men in expensive suits lost money to games designed for them to lose. Sofia had worked there for 7 years. She knew every corridor, every supply closet, every place where the carpet was thin and the walls were rotting behind the expensive paint. She knew which rooms smelled like sex and despair. Which ones smelled like money. She knew which guests left tips and which ones left insults folded into the pillowcases like origami. Douglas Hale was the hotel manager. He was 52 years old, with the kind of soft body that came from too much food and zero exercise, with thinning grey hair that he wore combed across his scalp in a way that fooled nobody. He had small eyes that never looked directly at anyone. He wore his manager's pin on his lapel like a badge of authority, but authority was the only thing he had ever really owned. His debts were legendary. His affairs were legendary. His habit of stealing from the staff payroll was so consistent that it had become part of the job description, expected loss. Sofia clocked in at 5:15 in the evening. She pulled on her cleaning gloves. She grabbed her cart and she began in the hallway on the 3rd floor. She changed sheets. She emptied trash cans. She cleaned bathrooms where men had left evidence of their loneliness. She worked until 11:22 in the evening, 8 hours of labor that would pay her approximately $98, which meant that when her paycheck came it would actually be closer to $75 because Hale would take his cut. At 11:35, while she was pushing her cart toward the service elevator, Douglas Hale appeared in the hallway with 3 men in expensive suits. They were talking about percentages and payoffs. Hale was saying something about a temporary arrangement and just until the weekend. Sofia kept her head down. She pressed the button for the elevator. She tried to be invisible. Hale saw her anyway. "Sofia," he said. His voice was thin and mean. "You're leaving already? I thought we agreed you'd finish the 5th floor." Sofia had not agreed to anything. She had already worked 8 hours. She said nothing. She waited. "I'm gonna need you to stay another 4 hours." We've got a VIP checking in and I need everything perfect. You understand? For hours. That meant she would not get home until almost 4 in the morning. That meant she would have to work again tomorrow. That meant her body would fall apart bit by bit. Sofia nodded. She pressed the button for the 5th floor instead of the ground floor. The elevator doors closed. Behind her, she heard Hale laugh, that small cruel sound that men like him make when they have found another person's breaking point and decided to enjoy it. The hours passed in the kind of blur that comes from exhaustion so profound it becomes a kind of anesthesia. Sofia cleaned. She folded. She scrubbed. She moved through the hotel like a person made of water, present but not quite real. By the time she finished at 3:08 in the morning, her feet were screaming and her back was a band of pure pain and something inside her had gone very quiet. She walked home through the October cold. The wind moved through the Las Vegas streets like a living thing, cold and purposeful. She counted her steps. She counted her breaths. She told herself that she was going to make it home and she was going to sleep and tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow would not be different. By the time she climbed the stairs to her apartment, her body was running on fumes and the crumpled foreclosure notice was still sitting on her bed where she had left it, waiting for her like a predator. She did not eat. She did not shower. She changed into the clothes she slept in and she sat on the edge of her mattress and she counted out her money. $34. That was all that remained. $34 lay on her bed like an accusation. Sofia Sinclair sat on the edge of her mattress under a lamp that flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat, yellow light stuttering across worn fabric and broken dreams. Her fingers trembled as she arranged the bills in a line. 28. 29. 30. The stack was so thin it seemed to disappear when she wasn't looking directly at it. Her hands were raw from bleach and ammonia, the skin cracked and bleeding in thin lines across her knuckles, and these raw hands held $34 between poverty and nothing. Beside the money lay the foreclosure notice. The paper was official, printed on thick cream-colored stock with the bank seal in the corner, the kind of paper that meant lawyers and courts and men in suits who had never cleaned a toilet in their lives. $125,000. The number was printed 3 times on the page, as if repetition could hammer it into her skull. $125,000. She made $11 an hour cleaning the Castellano mansion. $11 an hour meant she could earn $132 in a 12-hour shift if she worked every single day without stopping, without eating, without sleeping. To earn $125,000 at that rate would take her 9,538 hours. That was 1,192 8-hour days. That was 3 years and 3 months of working without a single day off, without a single mistake, without a single moment of sickness or weakness. The notice said she had 2 weeks. She folded the bills into her jacket pocket. The pocket where she kept everything that mattered, a receipt from her mother's hospital stay 3 years ago, a photograph of her father that had yellowed at the edges, a prayer card from a saint she no longer believed in. The $34 joined these relics of a life that was disappearing. 3 days earlier, Sofia had stood in the marble hallway of the Castellano mansion, on her hands and knees, scrubbing the West Wing floor. The tiles were so polished they reflected the chandelier above her, crystal and gold multiplied into infinity. Sergio and Pietro walked past without looking at her, their conversation drifting over her head like wind over a stone. The poker room set up, Sergio said. His shoes, leather Italian loafers worth more than her monthly rent, reflected in the floor she was scrubbing. 8 players tonight, Pietro replied. The boss is in the study. They disappeared around the corner. Sofia remained on her knees, the scrub brush moving in circles, her body present but her mind absent. She was furniture. She was the air they breathed without noticing. She was the kind of invisible that comes from being poor in a rich man's house. Later that same afternoon, in the master study, Sofia dusted the mahogany bookshelves. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls, most of them unread, selected by designers for their color coordination rather than their content. Luca Castellano sat at his desk 6 feet away, his dark suit jacket draped over the chair behind him, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He reviewed ledgers, his fingers moving across numbers with the precision of a man counting souls rather than money. His face was sharp and severe, angular in ways that suggested either great suffering or great cruelty or both. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, pale and thin like a crack in marble. He never looked up. Sofia existed in his peripheral vision the way a mop bucket exists, present, necessary, invisible. She dusted the same shelf twice without realizing it. That evening, at the Desert Rose Hotel, Douglas Hale cornered her in the supply closet. The closet was narrow, the shelves packed with rolled towels and cleaning supplies, the air thick with bleach and stale air. Hale was 42 years old with a receding hairline and a suit that strained against the weight of his gut. The suit was cheap, synthetic fabric that caught the light wrong, and his tie was pulled loose at the collar like he was always half strangling himself. His breath was whiskey and cigarettes. He blocked the doorway with his body, one hand pressed against the shelf beside her head, and she felt the calculation in his stance, a man who had learned that his position allowed him certain liberties. "You want those weekend shifts?" His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that made it clear this conversation was private. "You want me to put in a good word with the scheduling manager?" Sofia's eyes went to the floor. "I just need to work, Mr. Hale. Whatever shifts are available." His fingers brushed her arm, tracing the edge of her sleeve. The touch was deliberate. The touch was a promise and a threat combined. "Then you'll work when I say. How I say. And you won't report a damn thing to anyone." She pulled away, pressing her back against the shelves, and a roll of toilet paper fell to the floor between them. Neither of them picked it up. "I understand," she whispered. He smiled, and the smile was the worst part, satisfied, knowing, ugly with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences. He stepped aside and let her pass, but his hand lingered in the space where she had been, as if he were touching a ghost. That same afternoon, in the Desert Rose lobby, Catherine Mercer saw Sofia carrying fresh linens down the corridor. Catherine was 58 years old with the kind of beauty that comes from expensive maintenance, the skin pulled tight, the hair colored to a shade of blonde that never occurred in nature, the jewelry understated enough to prove its cost. She wore a Chanel suit and pearls and carried the weight of old money with the carelessness of someone who had never imagined losing it. Catherine stopped her in front of 3 wealthy guests who were waiting for their room keys. The guests wore clothes that matched Catherine's, and they watched with the special attention people give to a scene they sense is about to become uncomfortable. "Excuse me," Catherine said, her voice rising just enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "This is unacceptable. Your uniform is wrinkled. You smell like bleach. Do we not have standards anymore?" Sofia's face went still. She had learned that stillness was the only survival strategy in these moments. "I apologize, Mrs. Mercer." Catherine stepped closer, and her heels clicked against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to something terrible. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you. Are you slow?" Sofia raised her eyes. Catherine's face was inches from hers, and in that face was something far worse than anger. It was contempt, the kind of contempt reserved for people who were assumed to be less than human. "I'm sorry," Sofia said. "I'll fix it." Catherine waved her away with a hand gesture usually reserved for dismissing servants in old movies. "Just get out of my sight. You people have no pride." The guests watched as Sofia walked away, felt their eyes on her back, felt the weight of their judgment settling on her shoulders like ash. She disappeared into a service corridor and leaned against the wall and breathed through the shame that was rising in her throat like bile. What Sofia did not know, standing alone in that corridor, was that Catherine Mercer and Douglas Hale had created an elegant theft together. They had built a scheme as intricate as a spider's web, skimming money from the hotel's revenue, moving it through offshore accounts that existed only on paper, laundering it through fake transactions and shell companies. For 8 months, they had stolen $100,000. They had stolen $200,000. And they had chosen Sofia specifically because she was alone and because she had no one to tell and because her silence could be purchased with fear. When Sofia left the hotel that evening, the sun was going down over the desert, turning the sky red and purple and colors that seemed to promise beauty but delivered only heat and emptiness. Her car wouldn't start. The engine turned over twice and then died with a sound like a gasp. She checked the gas. 3/4 of a tank. The battery was new, or newer anyway, replaced 3 months ago with money she had borrowed from a friend who was now too embarrassed to look at her in the grocery store. She walked. For miles from the desert rose to her apartment, her feet screaming with every step, her legs moving through exhaustion so profound it had become a kind of meditation. The October wind moved through Las Vegas like something with a purpose, cold air that cut through her thin jacket and reminded her that she was made of flesh and could suffer. By the time she climbed the stairs to her apartment on the 3rd floor, the sun had completely disappeared. Her neighbor's television flickered behind closed blinds. Someone was cooking something with garlic. The world was continuing, other people were existing normally, and Sofia Sinclair was climbing stairs with a body that felt borrowed. She opened her door. The foreclosure notice was slipped halfway under the door, white paper against grey carpet, and the moment she saw it she knew that something final had shifted. The notice had been hand-delivered. Someone had stood at her door, had inserted this message of doom, had left her to discover it like a dead animal in a trap. She picked it up with shaking hands and read the date at the top. 2 weeks. 14 days. 336 hours. That night, she sat on her bed under the flickering lamp and counted out the $34 and arranged them in a line and tried very hard not to think about which one of these bills she would need to spend first. The silence in her apartment was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The city outside her window continued its endless motion, cars passing, people laughing, the machinery of Las Vegas grinding forward with the indifference of a great machine that had no idea Sofia Sinclair existed, and would not notice when she disappeared. She did not eat that night. She did not shower. She sat on her bed in the clothes she slept in, and she held the foreclosure notice, and she tried very hard to imagine a future that her brain could not construct. Somewhere in the city, in a mansion on the hill, Luca Castelliano reviewed ledgers and drank whiskey and existed in a world so far removed from this one that they might as well have been different planets. He had no idea that on the streets below, invisible people like Sofia Sinclair were being crushed beneath the weight of survival. In 3 hours, everything would change. But Sofia Sinclair did not know that yet. All she knew was the weight of the notice in her hand and the cold of her apartment and the terrible, infinite silence that comes just before something breaks. The October wind tore across Highway 15 like a blade wrapped in ice, cutting through the desert darkness in long, vicious sweeps. Sofia's 15-year-old Honda Civic coughed once, then died. The engine ground to a metallic halt, and the car rolled to the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath the tires in a sound like breaking glass. She sat frozen in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled in the October cold. 4% battery. No signal. Empty highway in both directions, nothing but darkness pressing in from the desert on both sides, and wind that howled like something dying. She opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit her instantly, stealing her breath, piercing through her thin jacket as if the fabric was nothing. Dead leaves skittered across the asphalt in the darkness. Her breath came out in silver clouds that disappeared into the night. The hood was warm when she opened it, but the engine beneath made no sense to her, a tangle of metal and hoses and things she did not understand. She stood there for 10 seconds, maybe more, just staring, because there was nothing else to do. The weight of everything pressed down on her at once. $34. Gone. $125,000 owed. 14 days remaining. Emma's terrified face when the man had grabbed her arm. Hale's whiskey breath on her neck in the break room last week. Catherine's laugh, cold and sharp as broken glass, when Sofia had dropped a tray in front of guests. And now this. Her car, dead. Her phone dying. Her last dollar spent on a child in the rain 3 hours ago. Headlights appeared in the distance. Sofia turned toward them. At first it was just a glow on the horizon, then shapes, then clarity, for black SUVs moving in perfect formation down the empty highway. They were moving fast, then slower, then they began to break. Sofia's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to tell herself they might just be passing through, that they might not stop, that they were not coming for her. But they were slowing. All four vehicles were slowing. The convoy pulled onto the shoulder and stopped, surrounding her car in a loose semicircle. Doors opened in perfect synchronization. Men emerged, for from the first vehicle, for from the second, all of them wearing dark suits, all of them moving with the precision of machinery. They took positions without a word, hands resting near concealed weapons. The rear door of the second SUV opened. Luca Castelliano stepped out into the October wind. He was 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a black cashmere coat that hung open over a charcoal suit and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples in a way that made him look both powerful and ancient. His face was carved from something harder than stone, sharp cheekbones, a jaw like a weapon, and a scar running from the corner of his left eye to his jaw like a reminder of violence endured. He wore a gold watch on his left wrist and a silver ring on his right hand, and when he moved towards Sofia, each step was deliberate, controlled, the movement of a man who had spent decades learning how to occupy space without apology. He stopped 3 feet from her. His eyes, dark gray, penetrating, the color of a storm at sea, studied her face, her trembling hands, her broken car. Recognition flickered across his features. "You," he said quietly. "You are Sofia. You clean my house on Thursday mornings." Sofia's mouth went dry. She had worked at his mansion twice a month for 8 months, moving through rooms like a ghost, dust cloth and vacuum cleaner, never speaking, never being spoken to. She had always assumed he did not know her name. Yes, she managed. "I didn't know you." "I was there," Luca said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Tonight. 3 hours ago. I was in my vehicle across the street from Emma's building." Sofia's eyes widened. "How did you?" "I watched you," he continued, cutting her off with the casualness of someone accustomed to not being interrupted. "I watched you give your last dollar to a child to help her escape. I watched you throw away your survival for a stranger's daughter." "I don't understand," Sofia whispered. He looked at her broken car, at the empty highway stretching in both directions, at the way she wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. When he spoke again, his voice carried something different, not warmth, not quite, but something beneath the ice. Something that had once been human. "You have no one to call," he said. It was not a question. "You have 4% battery on a phone with no signal. You have $34 that you no longer possess. And the temperature is dropping toward freezing." "I can walk," Sofia said, but her voice shook. "You will not walk," Luca said. He opened the SUV's rear door wider. "Get in the vehicle." "It is not a request." She hesitated. 1 second of hesitation, looking at the men in suits, at the weapons, at the black SUVs surrounding her car like a trap. "Before the cold kills you," Luca added quietly. "Get in." Sofia climbed into the SUV. The interior was warm, leather seats, climate control humming softly. Luca settled across from her, Sergio taking the driver's seat in front, Pietro sitting beside Luca with his hand resting on his concealed weapon. The convoy pulled back onto Highway 15 and accelerated. The city lights appeared gradually, growing larger, the sprawl of Las Vegas materializing from the desert darkness like an oasis emerging from a mirage. They descended into the underground parking structure beneath the Oasis Casino, 3 levels down, past security checkpoints where guards nodded to Luca without speaking, past areas marked authorized personnel only. They exited into a private corridor lined with steel doors, red emergency lighting casting everything in the color of dying blood. Luca led her through a final door. The poker room existed in a world beneath the world. Windowless, low ceiling, cigar smoke hanging in layers like morning fog. For green felt tables arranged in a careful square, stacks of cash in the center, hundreds and fifties, banded and counted, representing sums of money that made Sofia's mind go blank. Armed guards stood at each corner, AR-15s held with the casual readiness of men trained to use them. Men in suits sat at 3 of the tables, cards in their hands, drinks sweating condensation onto leather coasters. The air smelled like tobacco, aged whiskey, and something else, that specific scent of currency in bulk, paper and ink and wealth. Every conversation stopped when Luca entered. Every eye turned. Sergio pulled out a chair at the empty table. Luca gestured for Sofia to sit. She did, stiff, hands folded in her lap, acutely aware that she was the only woman in the room, that she was wearing a waitress uniform stained with coffee, that her shoes were held together with duct tape. Luca settled into the chair across from her, Pietro standing behind him like a statue carved from shadow. "Tell me about the foreclosure," Luca said. Sofia's voice came out small. "How do you know?" "I know everything that happens in my house. The woman who cleans my floors is losing her home." "Tell me." She swallowed hard. $125,000. In 2 weeks. It was my mother's apartment. She died last year, and the mortgage, the bank said I was underwater. I tried to refinance, but my credit is destroyed. I missed too many payments when she was in the hospital, and they... She stopped, looking down at her hands. $125,000, Luca said. "Repeat the exact number." $125,000, Sofia whispered. "And I had $34 to my name. Now I have nothing." Silence filled the room like water rising. "Why did you give it away?" Luca's question was quiet, almost gentle. The answer came out like a confession. "Because she was 7 years old and she was screaming, and I know what it's like when no one comes. When no one sees you. When the whole world looks through you like you're invisible. She needed it more than I did." Luca's expression shifted, something old and dark moving behind his eyes, something that had been locked away for decades. He stood, walked to the bar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He set one in front of Sofia. She did not touch it. "My father," Luca said, returning to his chair, "beat my mother in a Naples apartment for 12 years. We had nothing. Rats in the walls. Mold growing on the bread. She gave me her food, told me she had already eaten. I was 8 years old when I understood she was starving so that I could live." His hands were tight fists on the table. "The night he broke her jaw, a neighbor called the police. They arrived in 30 minutes. They looked at my mother's face and her blood on the floor, and then they looked at my father, and they did nothing. He owned them. All of them." Luca's voice remained level, emotionless, a blade speaking about a blade. "So I waited until I was 17, and I made sure he could never hurt anyone again." Sofia stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you are not invisible," Luca said. "Not anymore. Not to me. You gave your last dollar to a child. That is not nothing, Sofia Sinclair. That is everything." She shook her head. "I'm nobody. I clean houses. I scrub toilets. People like Catherine Mercer look through me like I'm glass. And Douglas Hale." "Who is Catherine Mercer?" Luca asked. The question opened a door in Sofia's chest. The words poured out like water through a broken dam. "She's the hotel owner's wife. She humiliates me in front of guests. She spreads lies so no one else will hire me. Last month she made me clean the penthouse suite 3 times because there was nothing wrong with the room. She just wanted to watch me struggle. She laughs when she sees me fail. And Douglas Hale is the manager at the Desert Rose Hotel. He steals my tips. He forces me to work overtime without pay. He corners me in supply closets and touches my arm and whispers that I'll lose my job if I report him. He and Catherine are friends. They're destroying me together." Luca's voice became ice. "Where does Hale work tonight?" Sofia looked at the wall clock. "He runs a poker game. Wednesdays at 11. Here. Table 2. It's the high-stakes game." Sergio leaned down and whispered something into Luca's ear. Luca nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face like a crack in concrete. "Perfect," he said. The door to the poker room opened. Douglas Hale walked in first, cheap suit, nervous energy, carrying a leather bag. He saw Luca and forced a smile. "Mr. Castellano, good to see you." Then he saw Sofia. His face drained of color. His hand tightened on the leather bag. Catherine Mercer entered behind him, designer coat billowing, diamond earrings catching the light. She froze when she took in the scene, Luca standing, Sofia seated at his table, armed guards watching every movement, Sergio and Pietro flanking the exits. Luca rose slowly to his full height. "Mr. Hale," he said, his voice like thunder rolling across a dead city. "Mrs. Mercer. How fortunate. I have been waiting to speak with you both." The guards move to block the door. Douglas Hale's legs buckle. He drops to his knees, hands clasped like prayer, his cheap suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders as his body collapses inward. "Please," he gasps, his voice cracking like old wood. "Please, I'll pay it back. I have assets. I can get the money. Whatever you want, Mr. Castellano, whatever you need." "You stole from me," Luca says, his voice flat and final as a coffin lid closing. $60,000 in cash replaced with counterfeit bills over 6 months. "You thought I would not notice." Hale's face transforms. The nervous energy vanishes, replaced by the trembling of a man watching his own execution unfold in slow motion. "That wasn't, I can explain," his words tumble over each other, desperate, drowning. Luca walks slowly around the poker table, each footstep deliberate, measured, unhurried. The sound of his Italian leather shoes against the concrete floor echoes through the room like a countdown timer. His shadow stretches long and dark across the walls. "You used a child as bait," Luca continues, and something in his voice has shifted. It is no longer ice. It is something colder. Something that has moved past anger into a place where anger cannot survive. A 7-year-old girl named Emma. You put her in danger to extract money from a man you were blackmailing. Catherine Mercer's face has drained of all color. Her designer coat, the one that costs more than Sofia's entire year of rent, suddenly hangs on her shoulders like a burial shroud. She reaches for her pearl necklace, a nervous gesture, a tell, and her fingers grip it so hard the delicate string snaps. The pearls cascade across the floor, bouncing, rolling, scattering like the dying gasps of her reputation. "That wasn't supposed to go that far," Hale whispers, his forehead now touching the concrete. "Emma was just supposed to scare him into paying. She was just supposed to." "She was 7 years old," Luca says. For words. They hang in the air like smoke from a gun. Sofia sits motionless at the poker table, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes burning with something that was not there an hour ago. Not anger. Not exactly. Something fiercer. Something that looks like the moment a person realizes they are no longer powerless. Catherine scrambles backward, her heels clicking frantically against the floor. "You can't do this," she hisses, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "My husband will never allow this. He's one of the most powerful men in—" "Your husband," Luca interrupts, and the words fall like hammers, "already knows. He is the one who told me about your embezzlement scheme. He is the one who wants you gone more than I do." Catherine's mouth opens. Closes. Opens again like a fish gasping in poisoned water. Her perfectly styled hair falls into her face. The mascara she applied so carefully this morning begins to run, not from tears yet, but from the pure physicality of terror, sweat mixing with cosmetics, the face of power beginning to crack. She drops to her knees scrambling for the scattered pearls, her hands shaking so violently she cannot hold them. They slip through her fingers. She chases them across the floor, her designer coat dragging, collecting dust and filth and the stench of a place where people like her never go. "You don't understand," she pleads, looking up at Luca from the floor like a child who has just realized the nightmare is real. "I have a reputation. I have a position. I chair the Arts Council. I sit on 3 non-profit boards. You have nothing, Luca says, and his voice carries the weight of a final judgment. He raises one hand. A gesture so small, so subtle, that only those trained to read it would understand it means the end of everything. The door to the poker room opens. 6 men in dark suits enter, their movements synchronized like a perfectly programmed machine. They do not smile. Their eyes scan the room, assessing, calculating. The leader has a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, a white line of old violence that tells the story of a man who survived what should have killed him. This is Victor Ross's crew. Eastern Territories. Rival organization. Luca just delivered them a gift. I hear you have a delivery, the scarred man says, his voice carrying the accent of the old country, Naples, maybe, or Sicily. There is no negotiation in his tone. No question. Just statement. Douglas Hale begins to scream. Not words at first. Just sound. Raw, incoherent babbling about money and second chances and children and mercy and God and all the things that mean nothing in a moment like this. His body thrashes against the concrete. He tries to crawl toward the door. A guard steps forward and lifts him by the collar. Hale weighs nothing. Suddenly, his body light as a hollow thing, a husk. Catherine tries to run. She makes it 3 steps before a guard catches her arm. She fights with the desperation of an animal in a trap, her perfectly manicured nails clawing at his face, drawing blood, her voice rising to a shriek that echoes down the corridor. Let me go. Do you know who I am? My husband, my family, I'll have you all arrested, I'll destroy you, or I'll. But her threats transform into something else. As they drag her toward the door, toward the Rossi men, toward a darkness she cannot name, her voice cracks into pleading. Please, she begs, and the word sounds foreign in her mouth, a language she never learned. Please don't. I'll disappear. I'll leave the city. You'll never see me again. Please. Hale is still screaming as they pull him through the doorway. The sounds of struggle echo down the corridor, footsteps, dragging, collisions with walls, furniture overturning. Then a steel door slams, and the sound cuts off like someone turned off a radio in the middle of a song. Silence drops like a stone into water. Sofia sits frozen at the poker table, her hands still folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the empty space where they stood. The fluorescent lights hum. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled sound of a car engine starting, then moving away into the October night. Luca returns to his chair. He sits across from her, his posture unchanged, his breathing steady, a man for whom this moment is simply another moment in a long series of moments that have shaped him into something harder than stone. They will be taken to a container yard in the desert, he says, his voice quiet now, almost conversational. The Rossi family has significant debts to collect. Hale and Mercer will spend the next 40 years in a federal prison after the FBI receives an anonymous package of evidence tomorrow at dawn. Financial records. Recorded conversations. Proof of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy across 7 different hotel properties. Their assets will be seized. Their bank accounts frozen. Their names will be destroyed completely. They will lose everything. Sofia does not speak. She cannot speak. Her throat has closed. Luca leans forward. In the harsh light of the poker room, his scar is visible, that thin white line from cheekbone to jaw. A reminder that violence has a geography, a map written on the body of anyone who has survived it. There is something else, he says. Sofia looks up. I had a man check the foreclosure on your apartment. The bank that issued the notice committed fraud, they falsified documents, violated federal lending laws. There is no legitimate claim. The foreclosure is void. Sofia's breath catches somewhere in her chest. I also had a lawyer transfer $125,000 into an account in your name. It will be there when you check tomorrow morning. There are no conditions. There are no expectations. It is done. The words land on her like rain on skin you thought had gone numb forever. Luca, her voice is barely a whisper. I can't accept that. I can't. It's too much. I didn't. You saved my child, he says, and something shifts in his face. That night in the rain. You gave her your last dollar so she could run. So she could live. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what you are worth? Sofia cannot answer. Tears have begun to fall, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth of it. She is no longer invisible. She is seen. She is valued. She is protected. And in the distance, the October wind cuts through the city like a blade through silk, carrying with it the sound of justice arriving, at last, for those who had been silent for far too long. Sofia sat in the leather chair across from Luca Castellano in the underground poker room, her hand still trembling from what had just happened above ground. The cigar smoke curled through the air in pale ribbons, dissipating into nothing. Guards stood motionless at every corner, their presence a wall of silence. She had not eaten. She had not slept. Her mind was moving through the events like someone walking through a dream they could not wake from. Luca poured whiskey into 2 crystal glasses. The amber liquid caught the light. He slid one toward her across the mahogany table. This time, Sofia did not hesitate. She lifted it to her lips and drank it in one swallow, her throat burning as the alcohol descended, hot and sharp like a blade through her chest. She set the glass down with both hands, watching them shake against the polished wood. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible, fragile as tissue paper held over a flame. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you help me? You don't know me. I'm just the woman who cleans your house." Luca was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched between them like something alive, something that had its own weight and presence in the room. His dark eyes, the color of storm clouds before rain, fixed on her face. She could see the scar running from his eye to his cheekbone, that thin white line that marked him as someone who had survived violence, who had lived through things that should have broken him. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and solid like an oath, carrying with it the weight of 40 years of memory. "When I was 8 years old in Naples," he said, "my mother and I had nothing. My father drank every cent we had. When the money ran out, he beat us. Both of us. Winter came that year, so cold the pipes in our building froze solid. There was no food. My mother took me to the church and asked the priest if we could have something to eat. He gave her a single roll of bread." Luca paused, his fingers wrapped around the whiskey glass but not lifting it. "On the walk home through the snow, we saw a boy. Maybe 5 years old. He was digging through the trash behind a restaurant, looking for scraps. My mother stopped walking. She looked at this child with nothing, and then she looked at the bread in her hands. She tore it in half and gave it to him." Sofia's breath caught somewhere deep in her chest. "I asked her why," Luca continued. "I was starving. She was starving. And she gave half our bread to a child she had never met. She told me something I have never forgotten. She said, because he has no one. We have each other. That night, my mother went to bed hungry so I could eat her half of the bread." He lifted the whiskey glass and drank, his jaw tightening. "I swore that if I ever had power, I would never let a child suffer the way she suffered. I would never ignore someone in need. I would never pretend I did not see them." His eyes met hers, and there was something raw in his gaze, something that made her understand that this man, this powerful man who commanded armies and empires, was telling her the truth of his own brokenness. "You gave your last dollar to Emma when you had nothing. You did not think about tomorrow. You did not calculate the risk. You thought about a child in the rain, and you gave her everything you had. You reminded me of my mother. And I will not let you fall the way she did." Sofia's eyes filled with tears. They came suddenly, without warning, spilling down her cheeks faster than she could wipe them away. She covered her face with her hands. "What happens now?" Her voice was muffled, broken. Luca stood from his chair and walked to the window. Outside, the Las Vegas night sprawled beneath them like a city made of diamonds and darkness. The October wind pressed against the glass. Now you rest, he said. Sergio will take you to a safe house. Tomorrow morning, you will check your bank account. You will find $125,000 there. The foreclosure on your apartment is void. I had lawyers examine the bank's documents. They committed fraud. They falsified paperwork. The debt does not exist. Sofia looked up at him through her tears. That's impossible. I can't accept that. Luca, I can't. It's too much money. I didn't earn it. I didn't. You earned it, he said, turning to face her. The scar on his face was visible in the harsh light of the poker room, a map of survival written across his skin. The moment you gave a child your last dollar, you earned it. That money is nothing compared to what you are worth. Do you understand what you did that night? You saw a child in danger, and you chose to help her when you had nothing left to give. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing a human being can do. He walked back to her and extended his hand. Sofia took it, and he pulled her to her feet. She stood facing him, this man who commanded respect through fear, who owned hotels and casinos and the silence of an entire city. But looking at him now, she saw something else. She saw the 8-year-old boy watching his mother give away her food. She saw the man who had carried that memory into power and used it to protect others. There is something else, he said. I have a position for you. The community outreach program I mentioned. It will be yours to manage. You will help families facing eviction. You will connect them with resources. You will give them the second chance you almost never received. The salary will be $60,000 a year, with benefits. You will not be invisible anymore, Sofia. You will be seen. You will be valued. You will be protected. The words landed on her like rain on skin she thought had gone numb forever. Sergio appeared at the door of the poker room, his presence announced by the soft sound of his footsteps on marble. He was broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair, and his eyes held the kind of loyalty that came from decades of service. Luca walked Sofia to the exit, his hand briefly touching the small of her back. The gesture was not romantic. It was paternal. It was the gesture of a man who understood what it meant to protect someone who had been left defenseless. Rest tonight, he said. Tomorrow we begin building your life. But understand this, you are no longer invisible. Not to me. Not to anyone who works for me. You are family. Sofia drove through the Las Vegas night in the car Sergio provided, the city lights streaking past her windows like fallen stars. She thought about the foreclosure notice, the crumpled paper that had haunted her for 2 weeks. She thought about her mother, who had died working double shifts in a diner, who had never complained, who had whispered on her deathbed that Sofia needed to be braver than she had been. She thought about Emma's small hand in hers, about the girl's eyes looking up at her with confusion and relief when Sofia had pressed the dollar into her palm. And she thought about Luca Castellano, the most feared Mafia boss in Las Vegas, sitting in that poker room and telling her about his mother, about bread torn in half in the snow of Naples, about the promise he had made to himself 40 years ago. 3 weeks passed like a door opening into a new world. Sofia stood in her apartment, no longer foreclosed, no longer threatened with loss. The deed was in her name. No debt attached. No conditions waiting in the shadows. She had spent the first week simply sitting in the living room, looking at the walls, unable to believe she was allowed to stay. The community outreach program was housed in a converted warehouse 3 blocks from the Castellano building. Sofia had painted the walls pale yellow. She had hung photographs of families they had helped, arranged resources on shelves, created a small kitchen where people could sit with coffee and feel less alone in their desperation. Douglas Hale was arrested at dawn. The FBI came to his penthouse with a warrant and tactical precision. Agents in blue jackets carried boxes of evidence from his office, files that documented years of embezzlement, of tips stolen from servers, of guests overcharged through phantom charges. They led him out in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face the color of concrete. Catherine Mercer was arrested 2 hours later at her country club, where she was having breakfast with women who would spend the next week explaining to journalists that they had always suspected something was wrong with her character. The news footage was replayed 17 times on the local station. By evening, the story had been picked up by national outlets. By the next morning, federal prosecutors were holding a press conference explaining the breadth of the fraud, the systematic nature of the theft, the hotel owner's complicity in allowing his wife and manager to operate without oversight. 43 counts of fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and money laundering. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution's case was built on documents, on bank transfers, on testimony from employees who had been afraid to speak until the federal government promised them protection. Hale's lawyer attempted to minimize his involvement, to blame Mercer, to suggest that a man of his status could not have been aware of such detailed crimes. The judge was not convinced. 40 years in federal prison. Each. Separate facilities. Separate cells. The kind of sentence that meant a person would exit that prison in a wheelchair if they exited at all. Catherine's husband filed for divorce before the sentencing was even announced. He had already moved to San Francisco with their children. In interviews years later, he would say that he had always felt something was wrong with his marriage, that kindness had never come naturally to Catherine, that he was relieved to finally be free. Catherine spent her trial in a state of shock, as if she could not believe that the rules that had always protected her no longer applied. On the last day, as she was being led away, she looked directly at Sofia, who sat in the back row of the courtroom. For a moment, their eyes met across the space between them. Sofia saw in that look the realization of a woman who had believed herself untouchable and discovered too late that she had always been vulnerable to the same forces that destroyed everyone else. Emma, the 7-year-old girl Sofia had saved that October night, was reunited with her father. Luca had quietly settled the man's debts and ensured he could start over safely, with his daughter, without fear. Sofia visited them once a month, bringing groceries, helping with homework, watching Emma smile without the shadow of terror in her eyes. Every Tuesday, Sofia and Luca met at the underground poker room, not for cards but for coffee, talking quietly about the families they had helped, the lives they had changed, the difference that one act of kindness could make. They were not lovers, their bond something deeper than romance. They were two people who understood desperation from the inside, who had clawed through darkness, who had made a promise to themselves that no child would ever suffer the way they had suffered. One evening, as the October night returned to Las Vegas like an old memory, Luca walked Sofia to her car. The wind cut through the parking garage, but it no longer felt like a blade wrapped in ice. It felt like the crisp promise of something changing, of winter coming but not staying forever. He stopped at her driver's side door. "You gave me something I thought I had lost," he said quietly. Sofia looked up at him, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "What?" she asked. "Hope that my mother's lessons were not wasted. That goodness still exists in this world. That one person can change everything." Sofia smiled, tired but real, the kind of smile that comes from knowing you have survived something that should have destroyed you. "You gave me my life back," she said. Luca shook his head. "You gave yourself your life back. I just made sure the people who tried to take it could never hurt anyone again." She drove away into the Las Vegas night, her taillights fading until they disappeared completely. Luca stood watching the empty space where her car had been, then turned and walked back to the SUV where Sergio waited. Sergio asked quietly, "She is good people, boss?" Luca nodded. "She is family. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives." Sofia and Luca were both broken by the cruelty of desperate poverty and violent childhoods, but they refused to let that brokenness define them. Instead, they chose to be the help they once needed, to be the voice for the voiceless, to ensure no child would ever cry in the street without someone willing to give their last dollar to save them. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that one act of kindness can change everything. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will restore your faith in humanity when you need it most. And remember, you are never too powerless to make a difference. Sometimes the last dollar you have is worth more than $1 million if you give it to the right person at the right time. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.